Okay, let's see here. Let me turn it down. I'm recording, but I can't. I can't see myself. I don't know what happened to my desktop audio. Oh, that's that. Okay. I'll turn that down a little bit. Okay, I don't know what happened to my webcam. I don't have a webcam, so I'm just going to wing this book review. I can't show you the book because I don't have my webcam. Let's see here. Okay, the book we call Walk and Balk, right? So the book is called Balk by Billy Ropper. I guess it's called Ropper. Billy Ropper, I'm not sure. Alright, so I'm going to just do what I normally do and start reading the book. The highlights, what I thought was interesting about it. I got to see if I can turn it back. Music down a little bit. Okay. Alright, let's see here. Alright. The book is about, let's see, 100 pages long. What does it mean, and what will it mean to America's future? Balkanized, to break up into small, mutually hostile political units. And I don't know why you have to have the word hostile in there. Why do you have to be hostile? Why can't people peacefully go their own way? I don't know why he borrowed that language from the Marxist professors. It doesn't make sense. Okay. He's got a couple quotes from the Bible. Matthew 10:34. Think not that I come to send peace on earth. I've not come to send peace, but a sword. And Luke 12:49. I am come to send fire on earth. And what will I if it be already kindled? So he's right in, I think, bringing those scriptures into the picture, because they really, Jesus really was and is a separatist, and that's why you get the media. They're always up in arms about this separatist group or that separate. Well, there's nothing wrong with it. It's the right thing to do. You want to, if you have a different ideology than the one that's given to you by your Marxist government, then I should think that you would want to separate yourself from such a creepy thing. And so, all right, so let's get into here, page 12. Okay. He's got a little graphic here. Union dissolved. Divided States of America. Chapter 1. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed my name. Okay. Balkanization means, to me, what will inevitably happen. Different races cannot be forced to live together. The only natural and peaceful way for different races to live is separately. I believe that racial separation leads to peace. Balkanization will cause conflict at the beginning, but once we are all separated naturally, then we will have harmony. You cannot enforce harmony and make different races live together who are not supposed to. It only leads to racial tension and conflict, as you see today in multicultural societies all around the world. All races would be a lot happier living independently in their own racial homogeneous nations. Anything else is abhorrent and unnatural. And that's a quote from Mark from Australia. Now, I don't agree 100%. I always have the problem with making the division on race lines as opposed to ideological or values-based lines. Now, if you want to separate on race lines, I'm fine with that. I'm not arguing against somebody who wants to do that. I'm just saying, for me, I find values to be more important than skin color. Now, can you do either one? Yeah, I think either one is viable and should be promoted as a option. And I think, as far as I'm concerned, the role of the federal government from here on out should be helping people to separate based on their values, and then for the federal government to shut its doors and go away. And before they do, they have to take the military assets and disperse them and deploy them to each, separate people group. That if we're going to separate in that way, it should be done peacefully, and it should be the, I think, objective of progressive society. And I'm using progressive in a different way than it's usually termed. Usually when the word progressive is used, it means Marxist, but I'm using it just meaning as if there is an objective progress towards freedom, then it's going to require people to allow and facilitate the separations that different groups of people would like to have. Okay, so all right, I'm going to move on now, page 30, and I will read what Billy Ropper has to say, and I'll comment as I go. Okay, let's see. In his article, Balkanization Beckons, Pat Buchanan stated that if a country is a land of defined and defended borders within which resides a people of a common ancestry, history, language, faith, culture, and traditions, in what sense are we Americans one nation and one people today? He further quoted founding father John Jay, who stated in the Federalist Papers, number 2, Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people, a people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government, very similar in the manners and customs. Does this still describe America? If not, are we collectively all still America? Buchanan agrees that the United States of America is headed towards a breakup along racial lines for many of the same reasons we've already outlined. In addition to simply counting the demographics, we also need to watch events unfolding in the overall culture, economy, society, and the armed forces. In Civil War II, the coming breakup of America, the Balkan example is cited again and again. The author Thomas Chetholm fought as a mercenary in the Civil War in Yugoslavia, drawing from his experience there and his study of history. He observed, "Did anyone write a book predicting our first Civil War? I did some research on that subject, and I was unable to find a single book warning Americans that they were fast approaching an abyss. That's not to say that people were unaware of the approaching war. In fact, many people were perfectly aware that a civil war was inevitable. My guess is that not a single person wrote a book on the coming war because they thought it would be a sort of picnic with a little gunfire mixed in. And in any case, it would be over in a few months, as history records the war ground the entire southern half of America into a smoking wasteland. It ground the entire southern half of America into a smoking wasteland and killed or crippled almost an entire generation of American men. Indeed, over 620,000 died, and the nation and its government were changed forever, but people were in denial. No one wanted to admit that it was coming, even after the war became an inevitability. Chittum believes that with an economic depression and grid collapse accompanying a racial civil war, as many as half of the current population might starve to death during the coming conflict. That may be optimistic. What would you do to feed your family if there were no more grocery stores, no groceries on the shelves, or gas at the service station? What about 6 months afterwards, with 300 million others all thinking the same thing? It's something to consider. It's no wonder that so many people are in denial about this coming Civil War too. So I point out if you get this book, Billy Ropper uses this contraption. It's a word. It's a word spelled Noone. It looks like noonie, but I think it's just short for no one. It's kind of strange, though. I think he might have been an English teacher, and the fact that he made up his own word like that. This is all right. I'm not really saying you can't do that. That shows just so I'm not used to seeing that contraption of no one as one word spelled like that. Of course, we have the word co-opt with two O's like that. Nobody says cooped. So I guess I won't say noonie. But at any rate, that's on a side note. I want to, bring up once again that, to try to, I have a lot of black Christian friends, and we're not going to war with each other. I think that I don't like the fact that these guys are limiting the separations like that it's just black and white. I think that you would have at least 3 groups, and you're probably going to have more than that, but I think you would have at least the 3 groups. You could have people that are racially motivated, and so you'd have a black group, a white group, but you'd also have people who are ideologically grouped, so you could have people that are racially mixed, that are fighting, say, for Christian separation. And you'd probably also have, of course, a very powerful Marxist constituent of all the Antifa groups, and they would have all the bankers behind them. So if this war started, all the money and all the government assets and everything would all be behind the Marxists. So I don't know how that's going to play out, because the United States government has been owned and operated by Marxists. I think you have proto-Marxists like the Founding Fathers, and so the Founding Father he quoted here, John Jay. He was just citing a sort of wishful thinking in his terms of the trajectory of the nation, that the Founding Fathers, being Freemasonic and humanist, were only co-opting Christians to take part, because that was the main makeup of the society, and they needed, you need people and you need money and resources. You can't, they couldn't start this original New Order nation called the United States of America without a great population, and those were Christians, and that's why they outsmarted the Christians and told them they would have freedom of religion. And now look at us with a completely Marxist, anti-Christian nation. from the top down. I'm speaking primarily, and although the grassroots Christians, for the most part, don't have a fight in them. They don't, they just believe in being subjected to whatever evil forces have taken over, and they don't have an option of separating and staking their own claim and declaring their own independence. I've been working on that for the longest time, trying to change some minds of people and saying, that you can entertain the possibility of having a Christian nation, a Christian secession movement, for instance, a Christian voluntarist, separatist. That's the movement that I find most attractive. But at any rate, let's move on in the book, page 37. Next, let's look at some of the ways that the migration of the different races within our borders has changed the culture and political status of those areas they move into. Sometimes, of course, liberal whites who flee diversity make the white areas they flee towards worse when they are guilt-ridden and desperate to prove that they aren't really racist. That means that, for example, Harrison, Arkansas, a town of 12,000, which is over 90% white, has a task force on race relations, and elected city officials invite the NAACP in from the other black end of the state to hold parades and bury caskets labeled racism. The mayor tried to work with a reality TV film production crew to import enough blacks to bring the numbers of them up to 10% in order to force diversity on the town. They hold Black History Month celebrations in the public library, which no black people attend. It's ridiculous, but they do backflips to prove that they moved to the Ozarks from Houston or Chicago or Memphis for the fresh mountain air or the better schools or lower crime. Their white guilt won't let them tell the truth. Worse, it compels them to want to make the places they come to just like the places they came from. That's why all 9 members of the Seattle City Council and the mayor there support tighter gun control measures for the city, too. They fled north from California but want to establish a liberal utopia in the Pacific Northwest. Portland, where I had the opportunity to speak a couple times, is a haven for homosexuals. Remember when we talked about why the Northwest imperative was a non-starter? The overwhelming dominance of very liberal whites there is a primary reason why them and the Chinese army, he says. White refugees are not always so destructive, though. The whole northern panhandle of Idaho has gone from a Democratic stronghold to completely red, that is, conservative, over the last decade. This is due almost entirely to conservative whites fleeing California, landing there and getting involved in local statewide politics. When I last visited Coeur d'Alene, before Pastor Butler died, it was much more liberal than it is today, for example, and that's a positive development for whites. So some white refugees are better than others. The worst ones will just have to be sidelined and compelled to silence when the balkanization process begins and whites regain control over our political destiny. Just as with northern Idaho, which went from being a solidly Democratic area to a staunch Republican one, throughout Wyoming, Montana, and the Dakotas, the arrival of tens of thousands of radicalized, racialized white conservatives have transformed the lean of the state legislatures from a Western libertarian approach to positions more paleo-conservative. This is nowhere more true than in Kalispell area, where its pioneer Little Europe is a growing confederation of affiliated nationalists. So white grows the far west, that in many areas the only minorities are a remnant of former Indian tribes on their vast reservations. Okay, let's see, page 38. Yeah, okay, so that's an interesting observation. I mean, there is some of this, in a natural balkanization. There are these places now that where people who have these more traditional European values are demographically taking over areas, and that's a good thing. I have no problem with that. Page 40. When non-white refugees or immigrants move or are moved into an area, by contrast, that area goes blue, meaning Democratic. The party of the minority coalition, the coalition of non-white groups, combined with homosexuals and self-loathing anti-white liberals, predominantly women, are now the electoral majority in America. Let me repeat that. We all know that demographic projections indicate that in one generation, whites will be a numerical minority in the United States. We already are a cultural minority. We already are a political minority. We already a minority numerically among those under the age of 15 who will be eligible to vote just 3 years. Do the math. Until the balkanization happens, the trend is not going to slow down. With every passing year, whites will become a smaller and smaller percentage of the U.S. population. Therefore, the longer it takes to happen, the fewer whites will be left, and the smaller amount of territory we will retain for our new America. That's why I propose that multi-racial democracy can't fly, that what cannot fly should fall, and what is falling we should still push and say fall faster. Like Thomas Paine said, if war must come, let it come in our time so that our children may live at peace, and it must so bring it hasten the day. Okay. Now, what did I just say above? The changing demographic situation in the U.S. means that the coalition of non-white minorities combined with nominally white anti-white liberals will always, from this point forward, outvote white interest. As liberals have correctly noted and celebrated, we have passed the tipping point where any white nationalist political party can win back control of the United States of America. What the anti-whites have accurately marked, some conservatives seem to have willfully ignored. Why? Because once they admit that whites, even euphemistically referred to as conservatives or etc., can never again regain control of the country through the ballot box, and facing the looming precipice of the huge baby boomer generation of whites, that is the Tea Party, beginning to die off, speeding up the browning of the electorate even more, what are the options? Surrender, expatriation, or admitting that the electoral process no longer offers any solution to America's, meaning white people's problems, or an avenue to petition for a redress of our grievances, secession or revolution? That's too scary a concept for them to think of or consider. Yet, I try to remind myself that we shouldn't be angry at whites who are unwilling to identify the assault on the Confederate flag as a racial struggle. Yes, they are gutless cowards, but so were the vast majority of Americans who, at late as 1770, vehemently opposed any revolution against their king. Many of those Tory loyalists who didn't move north and become the more docile, authoritarian, loving cultural progenitors of Canada eventually flipped the script and joined the winning team, being followers, as most people are, and only wanting to be in the consensus and hold the majority viewpoint, as women of both genders invariably do. Likewise, many of those who now wave the Star-Spangled Banner may someday come to realize that our race is our nation, or they might just shut up and get out of the way. That would be good enough, as even in the first American Revolution, a majority never supported the revolution until it was fiat accompli. I'm going to take some issues with the American Revolution being really what we were told it was, we the people, is not the average working family. It never was meant to be. That wasn't the we the people, really. And although some of the rhetoric made them believe that, but I find the revolution to be a humanist Freemason project to begin the beginning of the globalist New World Order. That was the United States of America. It was never intended to be some kind of Christian nation. People were separating for freedom. I mean, that was over. I mean, the settlers had done that 150, 200 years before. And by the time you got to the revolution, those original good intentions and, I think, justifiable commendations of having separate settlements for different belief systems was a great idea. But what happened, of course, these things, the passion for doing things for the worship of God, turned into seeking material gain and prosperity. And so, the Union looked like, in the Revolution and so forth, was attractive to people who no longer had moral values as their primary interest, and it just became a nation of people chasing after material wealth. And that's where it was at the revolution. And now it's come to so pronounced a system that look at the crazy stuff that's going on now. It's ridiculous. The army is recruiting based on an appeal to homosexual values. That's their draw now. And so look at and I'm saying Christians have no business supporting the military. The only military I would support is if, like I said, if we separated and had a separate Christian states here and there, I would support a military that was taken away from the Department of Defense and given to us because we paid for it in the first place. It belongs to us. Same with all the federal land. That's ridiculous. There should be no such thing. So anyway, let's go back to the book. Okay, let's see here. I'm still going. Okay. Colorado, Maryland, and California face partition challenges from those wishing to form new states from their parts through democratic referendums. Likewise, Catalonia and Scotland, again, may soon vote for independence from Spain and the United Kingdom, respectively. Texas, Barot's land in Zambia, and the northern two-thirds of Mali, called Azawad, are a bit less polite about it. The governor of Texas called out the Texas National Guard to monitor U.S. military operations within his state during the Jade Helm exercise due to the pressure put on him by anti-federal Texan citizens, many of whom want their state to become a republic once again. Puntland and Jubaland in Somalia are just shooting their way free. So here is my personal list of areas to watch for balkanization while we are hurtling headlong in that direction ourselves. Cyrenaica wants to break away from eastern Libya and control most of the oil in the North African country post-Gaddafi. Their capital, which you may have heard of, I guess would be a little place called Benghazi, East Turkestan, that area of China, which they call Xinjiang, seeks independence as a Muslim state, one which was setting for much of the action in Wasting the Dawn, Hasten the Day 3. A near majority of ethnic Russians in eastern Ukraine want to realign with Moscow domestically. The border countries of counties of northern California and southern Oregon want to establish a new libertarian-minded state of Jefferson, which joined all 50 states and petitioned the federal government for secession following Obama's re-election. The islands of French Polynesia are trying to shake off colonial rule from Paris. Transitional Muslims want to form a Trans-Caucasus Emirate out of the fragmented areas between Caspian and Black Sea. Kurdistan will emerge out of parts of one or more of Iraq, Syria, Iran, Turkey, and Syria, where the 30 million stateless Kurds live. Al-Sham would inherit the remainder of Iraq and Syria as a Muslim caliphate. Catalonia, the aforementioned region of southern Spain bordering France, described as sovereign in waiting for the sun, hasten day 2, may well vote themselves free, as may Scotland, which with each of these struggles or referendums, the use of the term balkanization will spread, as will the idea. White Americans will be moving out of southeastern states and the southwestern states to the west and midwest. Blacks will continue to move to the south. Hispanics will continue to flood into the border regions and spread outward from there. And the alienation of the heartland in America from the coasts will continue, our differences widening, stretching, then finally ripping, cracking, and tearing apart like the seams of rotten patchwork quilt. No one will be holding a referendum on it, though. The borders of the new nations arising phoenix-like from the ashes of the United States will be decided by cartridge box, not ballot box. An interesting question to ponder from an immigration and sociological perspective is this: are those who are the first to immigrate out of an area for whatever reason the most courageous and venturesome, or the most unsuccessful and desperate? So the guy asked pretty good philosophical questions. I do believe, for instance, rights. There's recently somebody was talking about rights not coming from the state. This whole, everybody's heard it a million times about okay. Everybody's heard it a million times about rights. Okay, here's a picture of the book. I'll leave that in the background. So, we've all heard this, people, this talk of, your rights and coming from, rights come from God or something to that effect. And, boy, I can't get anything to do with a screen to enlarge or anything. It's really acting strange. So, at any rate, I'm still recording, so that's good. So anyway, so yeah, rights, rights don't come from the state. Well, not really. You know what? The way rights work is whoever has guns has rights. The more guns you have, the more rights you have. That's all there is to it. It's never been different since the beginning of time. That's not the way it works. It doesn't work that way. It has that, we have that rhetoric, and people feel like that's actually the way it works. And there's there's a kind of a very flimsy structure that seems to, it seems to, it seems to work that way. Let's put it that way. It's seeming like it works that way, but the bottom line is this: the more, that's why I say we got to really get rid of the Department of Defense and get all that weaponry has to be spread out to local militia, and that's the Second Amendment. That would be right now. There is no real Second Amendment. The objective of the Second Amendment was that you'd have enough firepower to stave off a tyrannical government, overthrow or start your new government or whatever you need to do. You need the firepower to do that. And that's the way God created the universe. The way the world works is rights come from guns. That's how I'm sorry. You don't like that? I'm sorry. I don't know. That's just the way it's going. That's the way it works. It's always been that way. You just gotta, you don't like it. You want something more idealistic, and it's not there. There's no such a thing. All right. Let's see here. Page 52. Up until a generation ago, the Latter-day Saints was openly racial, denying that non-whites even had souls until the NCAA threatened to stop broadcasting sporting events by Brigham Young University unless they changed that policy publicly. They have since imported a fair number of Pacific Islander converts to Mormonism and Utah from their mission work there over the last 2 decades. Many of the FLDS, however, are unreformed and unapologetic on that issue, just as they are on polygamy. Interestingly, the recent Supreme Court ruling legalizing gay marriage opened doors to legalizing polygamous marriages next. If matrimony is no longer defined as legal union of one man and one woman, such a court case would both marginalize the Latter-day Saints somewhat from the mainstream society as being fringe again, as well as strengthen and reunite it internally, which would be a profitable trade-off for them. Some Protestant Christians already consider Mormonism to be a cult, and Latter-day Saints to not even be a Christian denomination per se. From what I have seen, the Mormons I know, they will be better off than most of the rest of us when the day comes. Okay, 54. Well, okay, it's going to be a long one. All right. Christian identity is a much smaller denomination with perhaps 25,000 official adherents throughout the United States, and perhaps twice again that number who share most of the beliefs of Christian identity. Many of them live in the Ozarks or Appalachians or in other predominantly white rural areas, although it is divided into more and less racial sects referred to as single seed line and dual seed line. All Christian identity doctrines share the basic views that whites are the Israelites of the Bible and therefore are God's chosen people. They are then definitely racialist, with a few actual churches or congregations. Most worship in family units or with other family units, and practice their faith in chosen withdrawal from mainstream Judeo-Christianity. One could indeed write a book simply about different Christian identity doctrines, and indeed others have. But within the current borders of the currently United States, well, I just thought of something. Maybe I could. Let me see. Okay. Okay, never mind. Let me keep reading. My thing is glitching. The video thing is totally glitching, but I think looks like the sound's coming through. This will be a good book review. Okay, let's see here. But within the current borders of the currently United States are also many other religions. There are Hindus, largely from India, following what some of them don't even realize was originally a racial religion developed by the Aryans who conquered northern India and brought civilization to it 6,000 years ago. The caste system of Varnas, which comes from the same root word as varnish, meaning color, were supposed to keep the Aryans' descendants from interbreeding with the native Dravidians. It worked pretty much for as long time. Then there are Sikhs whose turbans often get them confused with Muslims, and Buddhists and Shintoists and Odinists and Wiccans and Druids and everything else that ever was. It seems like when the lid comes off, some people will shed their religion and their philosophy like a sweater during the summer and focus on survivals. Others will cling to their faiths more tightly than ever. Remember the witchcraft trials. Imagine how some will behave towards non-believers if they think they're acting out of character of Revelations in the time. The apocalyptic cleansing could sweep away as many as ethnic and racial differences once it gets started. While it is true that more people have been killed in places like Cambodia and the Soviet Union and China by those trying to enforce an absence of religion, those squabbling over whose version of belief is best rank a close second in terms of bloodletting historically. For instance, the Crusades, their 30 Years' War, England versus Spain, IRA, you get the picture. Right now, religious division means some people wanting to protest or otherwise stop abortions while others support a woman's right to choose. Some support traditional marriage while others applaud the legalization of gay marriage. But when the Balk comes, faith will take on a higher degree of importance, and there won't be a civil authority around to curb mob rule. People tend to revert back to their most deeply held primitive basic group identities when the thin threads of civilization that bind them to others more removed from them break. Their families, people who look and sound like them, people who think and believe what they do, or who can fake it reasonably well, pragmatically, those who are different will be turned on by the mob. Like any other differentiation, you're going to be better off living around people who are more homogeneous and in a way that's similar to you. When things fall apart, as a matter of fact, becoming a part of a community means being involved politically and socially and culturally with it, and building connections and relationships with others within it for mutually advantageous future support. It's all about networking, from a community watch on steroids to a bartering system to group public works projects for the collective good. Join a local civic organization. Be active in your community. In many white areas of New America, that means either going to a local church or at least being on friendly terms with some who do. Being the only Odinist or Wiccan in a Christian community when the lights go out will be just about as good for you and your family's long-term survival chances of being HIV positive Somalian. Maybe worse if the Somalian can sing Kumbaya in English. So that's pretty interesting. I gotta reflect on what happened recently, with this whole fake pandemic, and how, even people in the same family were sharply divided, and I think that's the same kind of thing, that these sharp divisions. I don't think skin color or even family ties is strong enough adhesive for any kind of community when the shit hits the fan, if you're talking about survival and so forth. Now, sometimes it can mean you're being forced in a situation where compromise is a way of survival, but see, to me, all this needs all these differences should have been worked out during peace times, and there should have been a peaceful, civilized, adult separation that was seen as the moral and mature way to go forward. And all these calls for unity amongst diverse groups are just Marxism in disguise. It's just another way of globalization. It just trivializes your beliefs, it trivializes your values, because they're assuming there's some kind of universal common denominator which leaves your humanity intact, and it doesn't. If you're gonna go that far down for a common denominator, you're no longer going to have things like faith, and you're not going to have individual identities or anything. So that's just when, and this is the sad thing about the truth movement and all these protest rallies for freedom and so forth, is they have, in a sense, been co-opted unknowingly, I think, into just a globalist Marxist framework of dropping your differences. In other words, the thing that actually makes you a human, you're going to drop and come together. No, I'm not doing that. So, all right, let's see. All right, 59.2. Okay. I think that we will lose half of the continent, half of our current white population in North America before we have a white nation, mostly due to starvation and disease, and secondarily due to direct enemy action. But I believe that without the U.S.'s interference and pushing diversity on them, many, if not all, European nations will be able to sort things out there with a lot less loss of life. And those who will die first here and there will be the liberals who socialize and live among the non-whites. So the death rate for liberals will be higher than for racialists from the gate. It's true that racism is a disease that is spread through contact with non-whites for many, but on the other hand, few liberals live in rural white areas either. They will live in nice gated communities, which the non-white hordes will consider easy picking once the lights go out for a week or so. Okay, so okay. So, he has the scenarios like, it's one of these pretty dark scenarios, but it's kind of realistic. I think that what's missing from Roper's worldview is the fact that all the resources belong to the to the people who support the left's destruction. I mean, that's what's going on in Europe now. The George Soros and the Open Society. I don't think he mentioned George Soros here once in the, and the Open Society. I mean, that's what's destroying Europe, because they're telling the European people that they have no traditions, they have no culture, and that anybody that moves in has a legitimate culture that they need to accept, and that's how they're destroying. So the entire New World Order is in on the war on whites, and so I don't think I think that whites will fare a lot less kindly than he suggests. Although I agree with him that the European whites have a much better chance of surviving, because it hasn't been that long since they've been sort of stripped of their roots, and so they could find new footing. I'm a big proud proponent of British nationalism, for instance. Friends of Oswald Mosley and those guys, they need to be heading the spear of the freedom and truth movement. And in the UK, unfortunately, the people that get all the press and so forth are the multiculturalists who really aren't going to end up with the kind of Britain that they think, that they want. It doesn't exist. There's not a peaceful outcome when the trajectory is to displace European Christian values over there. So, and this is what my bone to pick with like Hitler and Oswald Mosley and the other fascists of the time was that none of those guys were really overtly Christian. They should have had. They didn't have a religious element to to their campaigns. I mean, and I don't mean just any religion. I mean, any religion would have made it strong, but that's not my main concern. For me personally, is that, are they under Christ or not? And I mean, there's the I don't know what you call it, the propaganda that Hitler had some kind of occultic, druid kind of pagan thing going on, and I think that was really very very exaggerated and so forth. If you actually read Hitler and see what was going on, and the fact that, like, during his reign there was like 200 churches built in Germany and so forth. It wasn't the rhetoric of an anti-Christian Hitler is just bullshit. That's all there is to it. But I just think that he would have been better off had he been a Christian. Now he definitely was aware of the content of the gospel, but didn't understand the gospel. Like most of the people don't understand the gospel, who are freedom fighters. They have this, I call it like the half Jesus truthers, where the half of Jesus they like is the half where he is endorsing healthy spiritual behavior. The other half of Jesus that's totally missing from their worldview is the Jesus who created the universe and is necessary for salvation and the forgiveness of sins. They don't need, that doesn't exist in their world. You could take, the leading voices of the truth movement right now, and none of them receive that half of Jesus. They only take the other half. And the same was true with the fascists during the 30s. They missed that dynamic, and to me that's really what's missing from a good fascist movement is that you need to identify with the true God. And when I talk about fascism, I'm talking about everything done voluntarily, the voluntarist approach to things that, and even in Hitler's Germany, he wasn't. It's obvious. You just got to ask yourself a couple simple questions. He wasn't trying to kill all the Jews. Why the first thing he did was kick so many of them out? He wasn't kicking them out because they were Jewish. He was kicking them out because they were Marxists and Marxist sympathizers. And so this whole bullshit about him trying to wipe out the Jews, that's all it is. It's bullshit. And so he at least wasn't, he wasn't trying to say, stay here and we're going to kill you. No, he was trying to get rid of them and let them go. So they had the freedom of choice of going somewhere else. And that's the only way to really move forward on anything, is to say, okay, are you here voluntarily? Do you want to be part of this movement or not? If you don't want to be, you go, you're excused. And that's the way it's got to be. And that's why we should do this peacefully. And my idea to have the big online website, declare your independence, you fill out your governance profile, you find other like-minded people, you find some land to claim, you set up your borders, and you establish a military, whatever you need to do. That's the way forward. That's where all the money should be going, all the money of the world. You of course you want to get rid of the central banking system, start your own financial system. That's obvious, and that's of course why there was such opposition to the fascists in the 30s and 40s, was because the bankers owned the media, and it was very easy to get the British and American people to think that Hitler was actually going to try to take over the world and all that crazy crap. That's for people that haven't really looked into it. They just, whatever they learned in school and whatever they heard on television or whatever. If that's all the deeper your education goes, or you're buying books from major publishers that are also owned by the same people, then you're never going to learn the truth. Okay, so let's move on here with the book. We were up to page 59 and 60. Okay. All right. I think that sometimes people have to be pushed to the breaking point before they will fight, or we feel they will fight back. They have to feel threatened. It's easy for them to feel insulated and safe and comfortable. The lights are still on, there's still beer in the fridge, and a game on TV, but the times, they are changing. When their backs are to the wall, our enemies tie sharp rocks to the ends of sticks. When our backs are to the wall, we split atoms. Okay, here we go. Wait, I want to talk about this. Okay. When their backs are to the wall, our enemies tie sharp rocks to the ends of sticks. When our backs are to the wall, we split atoms. Well, the thing is, I don't think he can claim to be part of that atom splitting we. Those were Ashkenazi for the most part. There were a few non-Ashkenazis involved, but I've been involved in white national movement for over a quarter century, and I have never seen a time when racial differences were as hot and the potential for breakup as likely as they are right now. That's why the ballot box is no longer an avenue to liberty for our people. Non-whites in the U.S. 15 years of age are already the majority. No pro-white administration will ever be elected again, not under this government. That's why we need a new America. Now, I agree with him. There. We definitely need a new America. And for him, and for people that want it because of, simply because of a white ethnic identity, that's fine too. I want it because I'm a Christian. But if you want it for that reason, whatever reason you want it for is valid as far as I'm concerned. Yes, the ballot box is absolutely owned by the Marxists. And I do think that, I do think that it's unfortunate that he makes a stress on white nationalists as opposed to, okay, we're not really fighting non-whites at this fight. If you're going to break it down ethnically, it's against Ashkenazis and not not other people. But and of course somehow the Ashkenazis are fulfilling the satanic reign on earth, and that's it goes up up into the spiritual realm. But even the spiritual realm has to use real people. I always say, as there is a body of Christ, there's a body of Satan. Body of Christ is made up of followers of Christ. Body of Satan is made up of followers of Satan. I think that that's a legitimate way of breaking it down. So I'm really against the kingdom of Satan here, not people of different color skin. Different sets of values is another thing. I'll go back to the book. Depending on the circumstance of the Balk, you might have to revise and adapt your bug out and hunker down plans to suit changing threats or opportunities. One rendezvous point or safe haven might be unreachable or no longer safe. Transportation or communication might break down. Illness or injury could intervene. The roads might be blocked with stalled or wrecked cars or roadblocks by law enforcement or brigands or both. Martial law might be declared curtailing all travel, but since other people in your circle of trust will learn your plan and be acting accordingly, you should try to stick to it as closely as possible. When you adapt and improvise, change or throw away only the parts of the plan which have been compromised, retaining the rest. Don't just make things up as you go along. That's what undisciplined lower primates do. How many white nationalists or preppers or patriots or 3%ers do you know personally? Being Facebook friends doesn't count. Those more than 100 miles away from you don't count. How many of them are involved in your balkanization plan? How many have you trained with in real life? How many would you trust to share a bunker or a foxhole with? For those whom you do trust, do you have a telephone tree established or an alternative means of communication and rendezvous set up? How many of your friends do you trust? I mean really trust, as in trust with your family's lives. Do they have addictions or habits? Are they reckless or hot-tempered? Think about who you want to be with in your innermost circle of trust very carefully. When civil order collapses, the only thing holding people in check will be their own sense of honor and superior strength and firepower. Keep that in mind when associating with anyone now, and you won't have to keep an eye on them then. Many survivalists spent their retirement funds buying gas masks and fallout shelters and canned food in the 80s in anticipation of nuclear war with Soviet Union or the Red Dawn type invasion scenario. By now, all of those firearms and ammunitions and other cache materials are just so much rust and mildew. So it's important to consider the time frame of when the balkanization may happen. I'm not an alarmist or a paranoid, the end is near, doomsayer, but in many ways the break of America has already begun. Okay, where am I going? Okay. 66.2. Okay. Let's see. Every day in the news we read articles that are increasingly polarized to the left or the right. People choose to read views which agree with their own, as previously mentioned, and read opposing views only to reinforce their own point and point out the others, how stupid and wrong and evil the other side is. We all do this, but never before have supposedly mainstream news sources been so politicized. Headline stories are at best editorials and more often polemics. We only express our political thoughts with those who reinforce them, and every day there is something new to enrage and outrage or desensitize us. Another dozen black and white crimes, another couple or three asinine anti-white statements by liberal celebrities, another black racial protest, another 100,000 illegal mestizos pouring in. Our frustration builds up and so forth. Okay, don't worry, the other side is also feeling more alienated and removed from the mainstream of public discourse too. To them, the government is racist and their enemy as well, even as it is dominated by non-whites or those who forward non-white interest, and even as it bends over backwards to placate them, it is never enough to prove that it isn't out to get them. Both ends feel increasingly at odds with the middle. The gulf between the races is exacerbated by every police shooting viral video. It widens every day. No one knows when societal contractions will finally succeed in pushing out this baby, but it's crowning soon. Everyone feels it. It is in the air, so much that non-political people are openly talking about it. Rebellion, civil war, secession, and now we're teaching them a new word, balkanization. I just think that he's off by a little, he's like his trajectory is off by about 5 degrees. I mean, he's that these sides, okay, the people who own and operate the government are on the side of the non-whites. He doesn't seem to realize that. I don't know why he misses that they're on the side of the non-whites. It's not, if he's going to look at it like that, it's not whites against blacks and Mexicans or something like that. It's whites against the entire banking system of the world, every government of the world. It's it's not, he's got this, he thinks it's going to be, has a fighting chance. I don't know. I don't get it. Especially when you're aiming the guns in the wrong direction. How will you have a fighting chance when you're not even shooting at the right people? All right, let's see. Okay. A real turning point will come when the local power grid goes down. Right, and they're talking about that. And let me see when he wrote this book. Because they're promising they're going to do that now and blame it on the Russians. It's the Russians. That cracks me up. I can't believe there's people are still like, oh yeah, the Russians. They still vibe by the whole thing. All right, let's see here. I can't find out when this book was written. I don't know when this book was written. It doesn't have a date on it. But it was before it was definitely before the World Economic Forum clued us in on the fact that they were planning a cyber attack. Of course, they're not. They're not claiming to be the ones behind it. They're saying it's coming, in some, I don't know, it's some white supremacists in their basement, Oh, man. Okay, let's see here. A real turning point will come when the local power grid goes down and can't be recovered. Psychologically, that will be the breaking juncture for many, when they realize that this is not a temporary crisis. Another will be when TV stations either go off air one by one or change their tone and content so obvious that it's clear that they represent new bosses and new power structures. Well, I think that already happened. I don't know, I don't know where he's talking about now. If they aren't censored or taken off the air by the government in a desperate last-ditch effort to maintain a loyalty of erstwhile citizens. Well, they already did that. I think the TV station's already been, that's been done, 50 years ago? I mean, maybe he's talking about now the internet. They're doing it with the internet. I mean, you look at YouTube now, news on the YouTube, it's absolutely worthless. It's absolutely all the crap that people went to YouTube to get away from in the first place, and now that's all YouTube wants to serve back to them. So it's so good to see YouTube's really starting to falter, and I think that in about 5 years, Odyssey is going to replace them. Now Odyssey has to get more. The decentralization of Odyssey, is in the works. Now they're powered by a decentralized library, but that to the degree that it needs to happen hasn't taken place yet. But it looks like in 5 years now, YouTube will go the way of MySpace. That's going to be now. Then I'll have a giant party. Everybody on the internet is invited to my house for barbecue. All right, let's see here. With rioting and starvation deepening in most major cities, and untrustworthy racially mixed armed forces and hundreds of thousands of unsupported servicemen and citizens stuck overseas with no way home, the federal position will be untenable. Martial law will be invoked, but it won't solve the problems, only exacerbate them. Habeas corpus may be suspended, but it won't save them. Even direct military action against civilians will only further fragment the weak coalition. People will turn inward and redevelop local and regional loyalties, concerning themselves with their own day-to-day survival. Washington, D.C. might as well be on Mars then. Washington, D.C. might as well be on Mars. Well, I hope that's the scenario that might work out. That wouldn't be so bad if it unravels on them like that. Then, that's not such a bad scenario. How much can they keep, since they own all the governments of the world, and they own like 90% of the governments of the world, and the few, like, African leaders that stood up against the fake pandemic they assassinated. And so, it's not, it's not like the people that are going to oppose them, the nations that are going to oppose them, have really any strength to do so. Okay. As of this writing, the country of Myanmar, formerly called Burma, is dealing with its Muslim minority by rounding up and deporting them. It seems that they don't want to become another Asian Muslim nation like Indonesia. See, I have nothing opposed to that. I mean, they're not rounding them up and killing them. They're deporting them. There's nothing actually wrong with that. If the majority of a country has a unifying belief system and somebody's got a competing one that's coming in like that, I see absolutely nothing immoral or wrong about that personally. This idea that every nation has to be open to every person is nonsense, and the Ashkenazis prove that with the nation of Israel. I mean, they do it that way, but they don't want anybody else to. That's very obvious. Stands out like a sore thumb in terms of, okay, the hypocrisy. But it's not like, see, a lot of people, the knee-jerk reaction is, hey, they need to accept everybody like they're telling us no, the other way around. It's, hey, look, they can decide who's in or out, and so should anybody else. Any other nation has that right. This is a very nice way of dealing with multiculturalism compared to genocide. Does that mean that the only alternative to deportation is killing off minorities directly? Not necessarily. If, after all, contrary to popular belief, genocide does not only include mass murdering of people to extinction, as it happens to the whites in Haiti. According to the United Nations Conventions on Genocide, 1948, Article 2 states that genocide can be any organized effort to deprive a people of their culture, identity, or institutions, kind of like what's being done to whites in the United States and Europe today. Diversity, then, especially when it is promoted, legislated, and enforced by the government, equals white genocide. Today, multiculturalism is an existential threat to white people. The fact that it is only targeted at white nations and white communities makes that abundantly clear. The fact that they aren't being lined up and shot right now is supposed to make what is being done to us provide a sense of some kind of relief. At least the knockout game hasn't happened on the street yet. People think right. Am I still going? Yeah, 82 to 86 too. Wow, it's going to be long. Do you know why that is? Do you know why they're glad to just be left alone personally at this point? Because no one wants to be the first one over the top of the trenches charging into the machine gun fire, but somebody has to be. When you leap, don't stop to look back behind and see if anyone is following you. They will be. Just keep your eyes on the prize. Your act of encouragement will inspire others. Without that even being a conscious goal of you just being who and what you are as a leader. Let's talk now about what I call the radical flank effect as it relates to the balkanization process. It's part and parcel of the dialectic struggle as first expressed by Hegel and later by Marx is what's called dialectic materialism. Basically, whenever there are two diametrically opposed ideologies clashing, they tend to each move toward the other and adopt certain features of the other. Just as capitalism became more socialistic and communism became more laissez-faire and perestroika during the Cold War. Today's conservatism is yesterday's liberal position. Conservatives are afraid of being called racist or are always on the retreat, while liberals are always on the advance. This is why conservatism is no solution to our problems. It only exacerbates it. Conservatives want America to be turned into a majority non-white third world cesspool through legal immigration rather than through illegal immigration. To your grandkids, the sub-nuances of that difference won't matter much. But at least on the way to extinction, conservatives can avoid what they fear most, being called racist. Expressly, the strongest of two competing worldviews pushes the weaker back, and whichever worldview is most rigid and unyielding loses less ideological space. So the more radical one is, the more extreme, the more you win. If not you directly, even if your reputation or credibility are martyred, then your cause still wins, because the radical flank effects allow a more extreme expression of an ideology to make a slightly more moderate expression of virtually the same ideas to seem more palatable to the mainstream by comparison. Therefore, my advice to activists and patriots is always to take it as hard and extreme position as possible, to give the person slightly to your left more wiggle room to present a compromise which is much closer to what you propose yourself than anything that the opposition would have ever accepted previously. Make the enemy relieved to be able to accept having their toe cut off by threatening to cut off their foot. Make them relieved to have their foot cut off by threatening to decapitate them. Everything is relative. Water always flows to the easiest path. So does human public opinion. Curtis Hoagland, the CEO of Global Social Marketing Agency, pointed out in a University of Pennsylvania presentation online, ironically, that the more extreme the personality and sensibility of the author in relation to the affinity, the more popular he or she is on social media. Affinities such as friendship, religion, political belief, and geography devolve into narrower and narrower versions of themselves. The true purpose of the ISIS videos is not to shock Westerners outraged by the savagery. Their purpose is to recruit like-minded zealots to the cause and establish their brand promise under the black flag. The ecosystem of social media is predicated on delivering more of what the user already likes. This precisely is the function of a follow or like. Once again, people tend to follow those who are going in the same direction that they are, who are just a couple of steps further along. That's why you, dear reader, need to be the one out in front so that you can be a person of influence in your community and the future leader of our new America. Already it is forming. For over 20 years, the migrations have been taking place. Just looking at one state, for instance, California, is astounding. In 1990, the Coeur d'Alene Press reported that Orange County family had convinced half its neighborhood to relocate to Coeur d'Alene, according to LA Times newspaper. Over 500 white California police officers, among them Mark Furman of O.J. Simpson trial fame, have moved to northern Idaho alone since the 1990s. The population of Kootenai County there has quadrupled in a single generation, mainly due to these white refugees who have transformed local county politics. In a High County Press article from March of 2013 titled "How Right-Wing Immigrants Conquered North Idaho," the local reporter wrote that what had been a Democrat-leaning blue area is now a conservative bastion where only Republicans are office holders. Nearly 2 million whites in total have fled California since the LA riots 20 years ago from Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado. And they're not through leaving yet. Okay, where am I going to go? 86. Okay. They're also not the only ones being driven out of Southern California by the Hispanic invasion. It's not just from urban areas of the north that blacks are migrating back to the old South. 37,000 blacks from Los Angeles have moved back to Georgia, 29,000 to Florida, fueling the formation of New Africa and displacing southern whites in turn. Like dominoes falling in a row, the Roman Empire fell in the end because the Huns pushed the Bulgars and the Goths into them. Speaking of the domino effect, former Ambassador George F. Kennan, one of the principal Cold War architects of the policy of containment of communist expansion under what they referred to as the domino theory, that if one country was allowed to fall to communism, its neighbors might follow, repeatedly and vocally advocated for the United States to be divided up into 12 separate nations. In July 27, 2015, Observer Opinion article, Bernard Quigley recorded that Thomas Naylor, a retired Duke economist living in Vermont, said he had received 10 personal letters from Mr. Kennan and several telephone calls between 2001 and 2003. The subject was always the same: secession, the peaceful dissolution of the United States, with Vermont leading the way, writes Mr. Naylor. Kennan was a closet secessionist. And by the way, I like Naylor. He died a couple years ago, right? But he was one of my heroes in the secessionist movement. While in the realm of ambassadors of foreign policy, let's take a look at how the rest of the world might be affected by the Balk. This section is of our overseas readers, is for our overseas readers, my fellow Americans who pretend to care. Some of these countries will become new friends and our enemies, enemies of our new future America. Closer to home, Canada will likely balkanize as well, following the American model closely as they do in most, aside from personal freedoms. British Columbia will be occupied by Chinese along with the rest of the West Coast. The prairie provinces are likely candidates to join the new America. The northern territories revert to the Inuit and Nunavut. Quebecos will get their much sought-after independence, perhaps allied with France, and the Maritime province will probably be allied with U.S. North eastern states and go whichever way that they go, probably to a UN protectorate. The most populated areas, such as Ontario, will be just as bloody and racially mixed up as any U.S. megapolis, with similar results for all concerned, except that white Canadians have fewer privately owned guns, so their options are more limited. Okay. Okay, I was going to skip over a few things. In Europe, expect nationalist parties to rise without American liberal influence, followed by an attempt to deport or segregate their own non-white Muslim immigrants, Africans and Jews. The success of these efforts will vary from nation to nation. Eastern Europe, which will become more ruthless more quickly, may end up in a better shape than Western Europe in that regard. Russia will experience a great resurgence of power and prestige, as might Germany and France if they can solve the refugee problem. Or the loss of massive economic engine of the U.S. will cause a global depression. In the long run, it could work out well for the old countries. Should they decide to take advantage of every opportunity, getting involved in the American Civil War by sending expeditionary or peacekeeping forces, with or without NATO or UN helmets, would not be advisable for them. Developing trade with New America as it emerges would. They will need raw materials, mineral resources, and of course grain, beef, other foodstuffs. New America will need finished machinery, vehicles, aircraft, ammunition, firearms, weapons, and medical supplies. The partnership could be quite symbiotic. One would hope that Russia might be an ally to the New America. Optimistically, we need all the help we can get, comrades. So I think that's a pretty bright scenario. I mean, if that happens, where Europe sort of becomes European again, and starts to trade with this, this new, what's it called, New America, which is traditional values of America and so forth. I thought that was a pretty good, positive scenario. Okay, let's see. All right, it's 100 pages. We're at 90 already, so. Who can you trust to not steal from you and your family? Who can you trust to be alone with your wife and your kids? Who can you trust to not act stupid and create a feud with your neighbors? Who can you trust to not decide to be a non-combatant or want to switch sides when it's time to fight? Those with divided racial loyalties could be untrustworthy. Obviously, sympathy and compassion for the other could be a fatal liability. Having too many scruples, likewise. What kind of person would you most like to cohabitate with and have your fate bound inexorably to theirs? Which of your friends and family simply don't make the cut? Which might you take a chance on and let in regardless? Under what criteria? How much canned food do they show up with? How close kin are they? Where do you draw the lines? Okay. Think of terms of lifeboat morality. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that could happen when things really get bad. Page 94. Okay, we'll read to the end. Okay, let's see. It is in the North that the final and climatic battle over the carcass of Imperial America will be fought, and an exclusively white nation will likely arise. Thomas W. Chittum, in his book from Civil War II. I was actively discriminating against whites while selecting college students for officer candidate school. I routinely turned down long lines of qualified white males to save room for blacks. I denied whites interviews. Every few months I threw stacks of their resumes into the trash. Marine Corps Captain C.J. Shevers, The Nation Looking for a Few Good Black Men, October 1995, page 428. The great questions of the day will be decided not by speeches and majority votes, but by iron and blood. Otto von Bismarck. People are vigorous and brutal, often find war enjoyable, provided that it is a victorious war and that there is not too much interference with rape and plunder. Bertrand Russell. That sounds like the Russians that they had done. And I'm not talking about the regular Russian people. Remember, the regular Russian people had been demoralized and disenfranchised and people completely taken over by Marxist thugs. And they let out these thugs, the prisons and everything like that, to go in and rape and pillage Germany, because the Americans and the British, who were owned by, the people sympathetic to Stalin, told them, no, don't go in there and orchestrate the surrender and all that. They wanted the rape and pillage first and the murders to take place as much as possible. That was, Roosevelt, Churchill were in on that plan. Okay, anyways, may you live in interesting times. Unknown ancient Chinese curse. The deep greeners took over Oregon. If you weren't one of them, you didn't get a breathing license. And they tied a plastic bag over your head. William Lind, The Washington Post, Militant Musings, 1995. We have a double vision. We look at our diversity and we also look at Bosnia, and we worry. Ronald Takaki, Professor of Ethnic Studies, University of California, Berkeley. There are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at its root. Henry David Thoreau. And I kind of almost think that's the problem with this book. He misses the whole Ashkenazi global Marxist angle to this. I mean, he doesn't really address it anywhere. And he treats it too much like these are natural outworkings. That there's not, never, like I said, he never mentioned George Soros, Open Society, and how intentional that is. And why are you aiming, why do you think you need to aim your gun at, your black neighbor is instead of the guys who are really in charge of destroying society? This is where I'm always going to have a difference with a strictly white nationalist. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying that I oppose white nationalism. If people want white nationalism and they're enough to pull it off, they have my blessings. They have every right to their whatever it is they want to do. We must act with vindictive earnestness against the Sioux, even to their extermination, men, women, and children. Nothing less will reach the root of the cause. General William T. Sherman. Everyone wants to think that they're the center of the universe, which is why Galileo had such a rough time of it. As a corollary, people like to think that human existence will end with them, which explains the popularity of apocalyptic fiction and movies in the year 999. I think it meant 1999, but there probably was in the year 999. There was also apocalyptic fever. People gave away all their possessions and stood around outside waiting the rapture. Every generation expects to be the last. 1,000 years later, we still are hopeful. Now, I will say that I am a date setter, and I'm not thinking that I'm part of the last generation, but I think it's going to be 229 years according to Hebrew calendar, which is not that many generations removed from now. So you can't really pin that accusation onto me. The Balk ultimately is not about the end. It is about a new beginning, a return, a recovery. Humanity was tooling along just fine until the designated driver dozed off and somebody from the back seat grabbed the wheel. We're headed for the ditch, all right, but this will be our chance to either slam on the brakes or to shove open the door and roll out. Let's hope for a soft landing. My duty as watchman is to warn the people I care about and have accepted a responsibility for about the present and coming dangers we will face. This book is a part of my effort to sound the alarm. Even odds are that the United States of America is headed toward balkanization or breaking up into smaller racially based nations within the next decade. It might not, but if you believe in preparing for tornadoes or hurricanes or a zombie apocalypse, then balkanization is more likely than either of those three and worth taking out insurance to cover. The kind of psychological, physical, and geographical insurance which just might save your family's lives when America falls apart. I agree with the statement. Like I said, there could be racial element to it. There probably will, but I also think there's also going to be as many ideological elements to it, and that you're not going to end up with sort of like he thinking, 3 or 4 nations, black, white, Mexican, and Chinese or something like that. I think you're going to end up with some black and white, Mexican and Chinese, but you're also going to end up with some multi-ethnic Christian states and some multi-ethnic, what we have now, multi-ethnic Marxist states. And so that's the Balk. The guy's got some pretty interesting ideas. You can find out about Billy Ropper. Adam Kokesh did an excellent interview with him. Although I think Adam Kokesh, I made a response to that interview, or at least I mentioned in some of my videos that I think Kokesh was a little too flippant in characterizing white nationalism as some kind of intellectual dishonesty, that it's not. And I think that just can't. Adam has no right saying that. You could say that white nationalism is a preference. It's just a preference. It has nothing to do with intellectual honesty or dishonesty. Maybe you feel that it has weaknesses in terms of, like I do. I mean, it has weaknesses in terms of is skin color really that strong of a glue compared to something like Christianity, for instance? And I don't think it is. But I don't. Once again, every time I say this, I have to reiterate, because people always, that you're either one thing or the other. That's how people think. But no, if you're a white national, black nationalist, and and you're able to pull it off, and you're able to establish some kind of nation that is based on skin color, you have every right to do that. You have my blessing. There's nothing unbiblical or immoral about that. You have every right to do that. That's all. And so, I don't want to, because I'm critical of some of his values and so forth, doesn't mean that I oppose his objectives. No, he has every right to do that. What I oppose is if he thinks that those are the only objectives available. That mine, my idea of a Christian state that's more ethnically open is as much valid as his. There's not like one or two valid scenarios. There's a lot of them, and ultimately, Christ is going to come back and he'll do all the separating that didn't take place beforehand. And so I differ. There's one of the other ways I differ with the half Jesus truthers. Nobody's coming back to save us. Well, the thing is, if we're put in a position where the only God can save us, then that's what we have to. Not everything is within human capabilities. That's, I think, to me, that's a sort of, I would call that intellectual dishonesty, to think that humans have that much capability when they didn't even create themselves. They didn't create the universe. How much power there is in the universe? How much power is involved in, I don't know if you know about this example. If you have two slabs of material, say, 2 concrete slabs, 150 pounds each, one laying on top of the other, and you somehow are able to remove 1% of the electrons from each slab. Okay, so each slab now has only 99% of their electrons. In other words, they have a 1% positive charge. Okay, a combined difference of 2 percentage charge. The one slab on top would levitate. Okay, well, that's pretty powerful. The thing is, when you figure, okay, how much would it take to push the slabs back down together to overcome that 2% positive charge? Well, it would take the entire weight of the Earth to push that, whatever the levitation, probably be about like, maybe 10 inches. To push that back down 10 inches would take the entire weight of it. And we're just talking about a 2% difference in 150-pound, slabs. So you think about the power of the universe, and then, humans are going to do something about something like a planet about to collide with us. And the thing is, there's a lot worse that could happen that's not that far fetched as a planet colliding. I mean, you have all kinds of catastrophes that are outside of humans to do anything about it, and even in the geopolitical world, God, when Jesus came, God had it set up so that Herod had power over Jesus at that point, in terms of if Jesus was not to elect to resort to his deity and just go as a man. That was what he was called to do at the time. But that, of course, he's going to be returning and straighten things out. That's why one of my favorite videos is that video, "What if Hitler returned?" And it reminds me of sort of like Jesus coming when he went the first day they went back to Jerusalem. He went to the temple and just kind of looked around. And then the next day he came and overthrew the tables and so forth. It kind of reminded me of that. I get a kick out of that video. If you didn't see it, it's called "What if Hitler returned?" You get it on Odyssey. And it's not like, it's not some kind of, academic treatise or anything. It's just a little comical video, sort of. It just reminds me so much, like I can imagine, Jesus coming in, looking around, checking things out, seeing what's been going on since he'd been gone. So there you go. Billy Ropper, the Balk. Maybe what I'll do is I'll just tell you about the chapters in the book before it'd be kind of nice, I think, helpful. Okay, see what the chapters are. If there's even a chapter list here. Let me see if there's even a chapter list. No, there's not even a chapter list. Okay, so that's forget. I won't even bother with that. But his point is that be prepared for something, because things can't continue. And I think he's right. But I think that my main objection is the fact that the opposition has a lot more power than he seems to think, that it's just a random kind of face value American, and there's not this whole world empire behind it. And I wish that he would maybe look into that and write another book. That would be nice. All right, thanks for listening. See you next time.